Islam is the world's second largest religion and is followed by 1.9 billion people, which is about 24.4% of the world's population. So it's a pretty big deal, and it's probably a good idea that if you are interested in history or, the world and a large part of its people, that you know a little bit about how religions came about and what they believe. Now, around 570 is the year that the Prophet Muhammad is born. Of course, the Prophet Muhammad is incredibly important for Islam. There would be no Islam without the Prophet Muhammad because it's in the name. He's the Prophet, the one that brought it about. Now, he died in 632, and around his death, this is when the Arabs, the people who took on Islam as their religion, they expanded out of the Arabian Peninsula and did a lot of conquering. So by the time that it was about 750, this is what the Islamic Empire looked like at the time. As you can see, it's very large. They conquered a huge territory in a short amount of time. And in this video, I want to look at some of the reasons why were they able to do this? How could they do this in such a short amount of time to conquer so much territory? Before I carry on, I'd like to talk about today's video sponsor, which is Magellan TV. Now, Magellan TV have very kindly offered to sponsor this video, and they are a subscription service for which you can watch documentaries online. Now, they have documentaries on a huge range of different topics, on history like this is, or on science, about the world, about technology, about warfare. Honestly, anything that you would want to watch a documentary about, you can probably find on there. Now, it's a paid membership service, but you can also get a free trial, and there is an exclusive offer for watchers of this channel, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. Now, actually, for this video, I watched part of the documentary series on the Quran, and you can also watch this if you're interested in this kind of topic and want to learn more. Now, if you are a viewer of the channel, you can go to the link in the description below, and you can find there this link that you can follow of magellantv.com/historywithhilbert, where you can get a free trial service for Magellan TV, which I highly recommend that you do because it's a really great service to look at. I've been binge watching quite a few of the things on there, so I think that could be a really worthwhile thing to do, and a big thank you to Magellan for sponsoring this video. But what if I told you that it was down, in large part, to climate change and to these guys? When we think of the term climate change, we think of something that's really negative for people. We think of places drying up, making it hard to sustain themselves, the climate obviously that's increasing in temperature, which isn't a good thing, and rising sea levels, which really isn't good when most of your country is under sea level. But I'm not going to get into all of the climate change stuff here, but I want to look at it through a historical lens. And this is quite interesting because in the past, climate change has meant different things for different people. It has been absolutely disastrous for some civilizations. But in this case, actually, climate change really helped and altered in what might be described as a positive way the Arabian Peninsula for the people living there. Now, what this involved is that in the years 536, 540, and 547, they have found through, it's very interesting actually, I'll link the articles below, but by basically looking at tree rings from the Altai Mountains and comparing those to those from the Alps, you can date when these trees were standing there. We can see a great decrease in the temperature that occurs over quite a short period of time. And what they believe is that in each one of these years, there was a cataclysmic volcanic eruption, and the fact that 3 of these eruptions happened so close together meant that it actually had a whole effect on the climate changing in general and caused something which I'll get into in just a second. Now, one quote that I just want to read about this, because my science is far from perfect, but I did write an essay about this fairly recently, and this was in Climactic and Societal Impacts of a Volcanic Double Event at the Dawn of the Middle Ages, and it said, "The cooling event was sustained for such a long time by a combination of other factors, including certain oceanic processes that help trap heat, and what is believed to have been a solar minimum around the same time period." So basically you get these 3 volcanic eruptions, you get ash going into the atmosphere, and it stops a lot of the radiation coming and bouncing around, which is what makes heat happen. This is obviously very scientifically explained, but it meant that the climate got colder on Earth, and it was by, I think, estimated 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, which is an awful lot in terms of climate, actually, because the smallest effects, changes to climate, can have really large impacts. And this is what seems to be the case that happens on Earth in the mid-6th century. And so this has been termed the Late Antique Little Ice Age. You might have heard of the Little Ice Age before, which was around during the Middle Ages. That was important. I've mentioned it before in connection to the Viking Age and how this made things difficult difficult for the colonists on Greenland, North America, and to a lesser extent Iceland. But this late antique little ice age, or Lalia as it's quite funnily referred to, I did write an essay about this, had a very different impact in Arabia to other places. It probably caused the Justinian plague, or was one of the factors for it, rather than actually causing it, probably just contributed, as well as a lot of the cereals that people were growing in the agriculture going downhill because of these locusts and things that were being spread, these parasites and things like that ate the plants, and it kind of caused a lot of things to happen. A lot of the migrations of the migration era might actually have their roots in this, or that the late antique little ice age actually helped cause it. But in the Arabian Peninsula, this has a very different effect, and actually one that kind of helped the people there in a way because of its geography. So what you get happening is that you get higher precipitation, so it's cooler, it rains more in the Arabian Peninsula. What this also means at the same time is, because the temperature goes down, it also means you get reduced evapotranspiration, which in very simple terms, again, is basically when you have plants, they lose less water because it's less hot at the time, they lose less water to the atmosphere. Now, both of these things had the effect that you got denser shrub growth, so you got more plants growing because obviously they're losing less water, there is also more water around, it's a better environment to be growing plants, so you got more plants appearing in the Arabian Peninsula, in these areas that had been, massive desert. They were still desert, like they didn't turn into jungles overnight, not like that, but there was more shrub growth, and this in turn also led to there being larger camel herds because they found more things to sustain themselves with, they could eat more, so they could produce more offspring, and then you get larger camel herds. And this is important for the people in the Arabian Peninsula. They were nomadic or semi-nomadic peoples at this time, and camels were a hugely important part of their life. Obviously, if you're traveling from place to place for water and resources, those animals that get you there are very important, and they're also important for waging war. So what this meant was you had lots of little factions within the Arabian Peninsula before Muhammad came along, and these were all fighting each other and vying for control. And so if there were more camels around, it meant that their capacity to wage war with each other was greatly extended. Just like Native Americans when they got the horse, it meant they were so much more mobile, and they could go out and attack more people faster. They were more mobile, they had more of a means with which to do it, as well as increasing the trading opportunities. Now, the Arabian Peninsula sits in a nice spot for trading because it's between the markets of the Middle East. So at this point, we'd be thinking of the Byzantines, we'd be thinking of the Sassanid Empire, and also connecting further to the Far East and those trade lanes there. And of course, Africa. It sits nicely between these two, so they could be right in the middle of these trade lanes, and there was a lot of trade going on at this time. Now, when there were more camels, the camels were what allowed these caravans to go through the desert. They were ideal for trading through the desert. More camels meant that you could carry more produce, which meant that the traders were earning more, which meant that more people were turning to trade. And actually, I'm not sure if it's in the Quran, but I believe that Muhammad's grandfather is called the first one to sort of use camels in trade, which he most likely isn't. But it's interesting that even that is a detail that's recorded, because we can then see the effect of these larger camel herds directly within Islam, and with Muhammad's grandfather already starting to notice these changes. Now, as well, with the higher precipitation, it means that more areas are suitable for agrarian farming, and this in turn meant that the population expanded, the human population expanded as well, which is also crucial, because we then see that migration start to occur out of the Arabian Peninsula. The population expands, there's more conflict and more trade, so you get migrations of Arabs, like for example in 536, which, if you'll remember, was the date of one of these large volcanic eruptions. So again, it's probably not connected, it probably is connected even. There was a large migration of Arabs into Persia following a famine there, and the famine was most likely caused by this sudden drop in temperature that occurred there. Now, because of these migrations out of the Arabian Peninsula of Arabic peoples, this was of course before Muhammad was even born, so Islam wasn't around by the time that they migrated, but there were still connections between those Arabs that moved into Persia and with the Arabs in the homeland, and so they converted fairly quickly to Islam as well. And this meant that they became a sort of fifth column for invading Islamic forces, which really helped them to capture areas in Persia, which at the time was under the Sassanid Empire. So these kind of acted as a special force that they could rely on within the territory, who knew the land. And this again was because of the larger population, which was also down to the fact that the climate was changing and that they had more capacity with camels. Now, of course, camels could be used militarily, so as we see here, camel cavalry was an important part of early Islamic and, well, indeed later Islamic armies. As well as, perhaps more importantly, the fact that camels could be used to supply and resupply forces, which, it made them so much more mobile that they were able to capture large areas because they could keep the supply lines open with all of these camels that were there, which wouldn't have been there without the climate changing. Not to mention the fact that the very bedrock of Islam, Mecca, came about and became an important city because of this increased trade between the Middle East and the Horn of Africa, which again was possible because there were more camels that were coming, that they were able to carry the trade through, and because there were more people due to, again, the climate changing, due to more agrarian farming and more camels. It meant intensification of conflict and trade, larger centralization happening. And so one can really see that this is an incredibly important step. It's not the be-all and the end-all, but there are certain things that change in a way that makes it much easier for an Arabian power to become dominant. And in this case, of course, as history played out, that was Islam and the Islamic Empire. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been a little bit random. Please do check out the sponsor, Magellan TV, as well. I really appreciate them looking into that, because you can find out a lot more with their documentaries, like the one that I mentioned here, as well as the other ones. I've been watching a fair few of them, just sort of in my spare time, and I thought this would be a pretty whack topic to make a video about, also because I'd done the essay about it, and I thought it was quite fun. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with me that sort of the climate change and the larger camel herds were an important step, or do you think, Hilbert, you're just being really edgy at this point and you should stop? Either answer is acceptable, by the way. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one. I'm Hilbert, and this has been The History.